Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm one of the members here at Deeside Christian Fellowship, and it's my great joy this morning to welcome you to church. If this is your very first time, maybe at anything churchy ever, or maybe you've been sitting in the same seat since before I was born, I don't know. But you're welcome to church this morning. It's really great to see you. A church is an assembly, it's a gathering of people, and we're gathered here today to worship God Almighty, to offer him our love, our praise, our thanksgiving. So let's quieten our hearts as we start, and let's hear from him in Psalm 95. Here's a few words from one of the Psalms. "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker." God is our Maker. He is the ruler of everyone and everything. We're going to be thinking a bit more about that idea a little bit later in our service. But we're going to start by singing two songs together in praise and worship to the Lord, our Maker. So let's stand if we're able, and let's sing these songs together.
When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army was encamped around him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and Joab's brother Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?" And Abishai said, "I will go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night. And there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Then said Abishai, "David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike twice." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" And David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go." So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. This is the word of the Lord. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Neil. I hope we were all listening up during that reading. First, before we go any further in the service, a few things to tell you about. The first of all is a missionary update from a family that we support living in Rome, the Hamilton family. I'll let them explain a little bit more about what they're doing rather than take up all their time. But let's watch this video now. We're going to hear from them and we'll pray for them afterwards.
Hello everyone at Deeside. You may or may not remember us. We are the Hamilton family and we are in Rome. My name is Ruth and I'm a primary school teacher.
Hello, my name is Isaiah. I'm 11 years old and I play water polo.
Hello, my name is Holly. I'm 10 years old and sport-wise I do athletics.
Hello, I'm Joshua. I'm 5 years old and I do swimming.
Oh, good job. And I'm Andy. And I serve at the Bible College, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Bible College soon. In the meantime, we all wanted to say thank you. Grazie mille for all your support and all your love.
Ciao!
Ciao!
My role here in Italy is to be the vice principal of eBay. eBay is a Bible college, and our vision is to equip Italian believers to serve the Lord. And this is our
King, hear the words of the servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now, therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord. For the King of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do harm. Because my life was precious in your eyes this day, behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. And David answered and said, here is the spear, O king. Let one of the... David, God's chosen king, but a lot of it is taken up with David's chosen king on the run. He's running from King Saul. David was chosen by God and anointed by Samuel in chapter 16. With the Lord's help, he defeats Goliath in chapter 17. And in chapter 18, King Saul, out of jealousy, flings a spear at David. And then in verse 19, he's warned of Saul's plot to kill him, and he escapes. And from that point to the end of the chapter, the remaining 12 chapters, we find David on the run, living in constant threat of attack from his enemies. God choosing David didn't suddenly make him immune to struggles. Quite the opposite. God choosing David led him in to struggles. God could easily have taken David away. God could easily have taken Saul out of the picture, clearing the way for David, his new king, to become king. But instead, God, in his providence, chose a different route for David, a route that would truly test David's faith. Some of you will have just finished exams. I think there are some young people here that have just finished exams. I'm not a young person, but I've just finished an exam as well. And I must say, I don't particularly enjoy exams. The best part of exams for me is when they finish. And some of you may be able to resonate with that. But exams are good for us because they test us. Tests are generally hard, but that's the point of a test. They're not meant to be easy because they're meant to stretch us, to grow us, to develop us, to prepare us. Testing is the lens through which we're to look at all these little episodes of David in the book of Samuel, in the book of 1 Samuel. And because God's providence includes testing, today's episode perfectly illustrates this. The testing in this chapter sounds a lot like the testing we saw in chapter 24, doesn't it? David was being pursued. Saul got close. Saul came into a cave where David was with his team, and David had the opportunity to take him out, but didn't. Well, in 26, we see in verses 1 to 5, the Ziphites yet again tip off Saul as to David's whereabouts, and Saul closes in on his target. But there's one particular thing that I want to draw our attention to that I find quite striking in these opening 5 verses. Look at verse 2 and 3 with me. It says, so Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learnt that Saul had indeed come. Did you notice the repeated word there? The word wilderness is used 4 times in these 2 verses. And I don't believe it's a mistake that it's there. Because in the Bible, when we hear the word wilderness, when the word wilderness is used, it's generally associated with testing. It was into the wilderness. Remember that God led his people after miraculously freeing them from Egyptian slavery. And it was in the wilderness that Jesus was led by the Spirit, or thrown by the Spirit after his baptism, where God the Father had supernaturally affirmed his Son. On both these occasions, the nation of Israel and Jesus, God follows a supernatural affirming with a time of spiritual testing in the wilderness. God chose David. He supernaturally affirmed him and his presence with him in enabling him to defeat Goliath. But then he providentially sends him out into the wilderness to be tested. God calls his people, and then he tests them. That's God's pattern, which we see again and again throughout the Bible. You think of Noah, think of Abraham, think of Joseph, Moses, David, Peter, Paul, and many others. And this is God's pattern for his people today. He calls us, and then he tests us as my Lord and my King. And then David questions Saul about why he's hunting him down. But notice that even when he's talking to Saul about why are you hunting me down, the way that he does shows that he's the real deal. Look in the middle of verse 19, we see David's central concern is being away from God's promised land. Because he knew that the promised land was where God was worshipped and dwelled with his people. He even speaks further on of his longing to die in the promised land. You see, David's desire, his greatest longing was to worship God with God's people. It doesn't seem at this point that death is too much of the problem here. It's more about being away from God's people. You see here, David's looking increasingly more like God's king, isn't he? And in contrast, Saul is looking increasingly more powerless to stop him becoming king. Despite Saul's public confession, which follows, David still doesn't trust him, so he asks one of Saul's men to come up and take the spear back to King Saul. Saul has been humiliated. He's been upstaged yet again by David's integrity. David, in God's providence, is looking more like the king who will triumph. And David, strengthened by his trust in God's providence, is growing to recognize this himself. Look with me at what he says in verse 23 and 24. He says, "The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation." David recognizes that God's providence ensures triumph. He rests confident that righteousness and faithfulness will one day be rewarded. His hope for the future deliverance from the wilderness struggles is grounded in the power of God's providence. David, in this chapter, again had the chance, as Tim Chester put it in his commentary on 1 Samuel, he had the chance to skip this life of suffering and fast forward to his kingdom